So the good news is if you're someone who Monday to Friday is just strapped for time and the only time that you can fit your cardiovascular exercise in is on the weekend, you can still get huge reductions in risk for these cardiovascular events. A study that came out, I think it was 3 or 4 months ago.
Mm-hmm.
You might have seen this.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at weekend warrior exercise. Have we spoken about this?
I don't think we spoke about this.
Okay. So the purpose of the study was to see whether doing all of your aerobic cardiovascular exercise, which they described as moderate to vigorous,
Mm-hmm.
if you were doing sort of most of that on the weekend, like a weekend warrior,
Okay.
versus evenly spreading it out across the week.
All right.
And this was using the UK Biobank cohort. So I think it was like nearly 90,000 people that were included. Yeah, 89,573 subjects. And they were followed for a long time. I think it was a decade or more.
Mm.
And these particular subjects wore an accelerometer for 1 week
Mm-hmm.
to look at the exercise that they were doing and how it was distributed over a week. And then they were able to group people. So those that were doing 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous exercise, which is the recommendations per week,
Mm-hmm.
those that were doing 150 minutes evenly spread across the week, those that were doing most of that 150 minutes on the weekend, and then compared to people that were not doing 150 minutes.
Cool.
And the idea was to see, is there a difference in the cardiovascular disease benefits based on how you distribute that exercise?
Mm-hmm.
What do you think they found?
I knew that was going to be the next question. We love to put each other on the spot. Okay. My gut tells me that even distribution would be more optimal than just jamming it all in on 1 or 2 days for a few reasons. It's very clear that the acute benefits of exercise, like you have these immediate benefits, right, in the moment. So my gut tells me that if you can get the acute benefits spread evenly across the week, every single day, or even more than once a day, that you will do better than somebody who just gets that huge volume in 1 or 2 days, because then on the other 5 days of the week, you're missing out on the acute benefits of exercise, right? And then, of course, extrapolate that over years. I think you'll get better benefits if you have that even distribution. That would be my... I'm wrong, aren't I?
Okay. So either way, whether you did that 150 minutes spread throughout the week or most of it on the weekend,
Better than nothing.
massive risk reductions in cardiovascular
Sure.
disease. So they looked at atrial fibrillation, heart attacks, heart failure, and stroke. They were the 4 outcomes of interest. And across the board, no matter how you distributed that exercise, compared to the sedentary person,
Right.
there was about a 20% reduction in risk of atrial fibrillation,
Yeah.
around 25 to 30% risk reduction for a heart attack, almost 40% risk reduction for heart failure,
Mm-hmm.
and almost 20% risk reduction for stroke.
Okay.
There was no significant difference between the two groups.
Interesting.
Now, there is, I think, a little bit of a limitation with this in the way that they decided who was a weekend warrior and who was not.
Mm-hmm.
It was, you essentially, you were a weekend warrior if you did more than 50% of your 150-minute activity on the weekend.
Yeah.
And the others were less than 50%.
All right.
But it might have been that there's just not a whole lot of difference
Right.
between the two groups,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you might do 60% of your activity on the weekend and 40% through the week,
Yep.
compared to the opposite, 40% kind of midweek and 60% midweek and 40% on the weekend.
Sure. You don't classify as a weekend warrior.
And you
right?
don't classify as a weekend warrior.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't really expect a
Yep.
big difference.
Yep.
So it might have been that there's just not enough contrast.
Right.
Like I'd be interested if they looked more at
80-20 or
people
something.
that did 80%
Yeah.
of their exercise on the weekends.
Same, yeah. I mean, I would also be interested in seeing other outcomes measured though, because those outcomes are obviously very important, but what about like metabolic outcomes that relate to glycemic control? That's where I would say, hold on a second, if you had to choose between spreading it evenly over 7 days or jamming it into 2, and you care about diabetes or glycemic control, for sure you're going to get better management with daily because the time in range is going to be affected. Every meal's affected. Like walking after meals for 20 minutes, we know can do amazing things to blood glucose control.
And then that might even become more important based on your metabolic health.
Yeah.
So who are the subjects that you're looking at?
Exactly.
Because if you have pre-diabetes or type 2 diabetes, then there might be an even stronger case for daily exercise versus being the weekend warrior.
Right. But then, as you say, compared to somebody who's sedentary, just do something. Try hit the dose.
Yeah, so the good news is if you're someone who Monday to Friday is just strapped for time, and the only time that you can fit your cardiovascular exercise in is on the weekend, you can still get huge reductions in risk for these cardiovascular events.
Yes. But then if we talk about somebody, let's say, who has different goals, right? Non-cardiovascular goals, this is a completely different conversation, right? If you have strength goals or bone density goals, I don't think it's going to cut it doing all your exercise on one day, unfortunately. Which is why
it gets tough in just the one weekend to cover your moderate intensity cardiovascular, high intensity cardiovascular, and strength training.
Yes.
All in 2 days.
Yeah. So one of the takeaways is, don't worry, it's better than nothing. If you only have 1 or 2 days, great, get it in. Find a way to get it in. But if you can spread it out across a week and use different modalities, you'll probably get better results.
But if you only had 1 or 2 days, this is something we've spoken about before, then would you be doing 150 plus minutes of moderate cardiovascular exercise, or would you be having a bias to strength training and high intensity?
Yeah, I would think that personally I would put more into the high intensity stuff. If I only had 2 days, and I mean, also, like, I'm assuming they only have like an hour or so per workout, so like 2 hours over a weekend to work out. I'm not trying to do 2 to 3 hours of just moderate cardio. I would be trying to get a bit of everything. And we know that moderate intensity cardio is not the only way to improve cardiovascular health and fitness, right? Even resistance training improves risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So does high intensity, even sprint training, which is very, very low duration. But again, think about how many tools we have, which is what I love about this kind of stuff. The exercise toolkit is quite large, and most people will have a preference to one thing or another, but just know that there are so many options. There's so many different ways you can do it. And we spoke about this in Bali, like over and over in every workshop. Like, what are your goals? What are your preferences? We're going to be creating essentially these movement plans for everybody, and everyone has different preferences. And
not just preferences, but different starting points.
Right.
So when you measure your current health status, be it through functional tests like we did, plus blood biomarkers, where are your strong points and where are your weak points? And therefore, where should you be focused on?